Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this panel discussion about science fiction and how and to what extent that genre, whether it's art, film, music, or literature, might help us reshape and reimagine our futures together. We have a very distinguished panel here this evening with plenty to say from quite diverse backgrounds. So let me introduce them. First of all, we have Sylvie Denis, who is a short story writer, novelist, essayist, anthologist, editor-in-chief of Cyber Dreams magazine, and also a translator of science fiction and fantasy, authors such as Greg Ewan, Stephen Baxter, Alistair Reynolds, and so forth. Sylvie's novels and short stories emphasize the theme of the impact of new technology on human society, something I hope we're going to get into this evening. And she's won numerous awards, including the Solaris and the Julia Verlanger Prize. Sylvie has quite rightly been dubbed the Grande Dame of French science fiction. It's a marvelous title, I think.
There are several Grande Dames in France.
Oh,
of course.
But you are you are the one with us tonight. We also have Ken MacLeod, Scottish science fiction writer, multiple award-winning author of many science fiction novels and anthologies, the Full Revolution Quartet, Engines of Light trilogy, and the recent Corporation Wars trilogy, and many standalone novels as well. Ken's novels explore socialist, communist, and anarchist ideas and technical themes such as singularities, divergent human evolution, post-humanism, and techno-utopianism. That makes them sound very trite. They're also very funny, I'd like to add as well. And finally, we've got Martin Villeneuve. Now, Martin first stood out as a filmmaker in advertising through Sidley and Cirque du Soleil. In 2012, he launched his first feature film, Mars et Avril, which was adapted from his eponymous graphic novels. This film had its world premiere in Carla Vivari and opened the Focus section at FNC. It received 10 nominations, including one for Best Adapted Screenplay at the Canadian Screen Awards. So far, Martin is the only Quebecois to have given a TED Talk. And in 2014, he won an award for his performance in Imelda, for which he's recently shot 2 sequels starring Robert Lepage and Jeanette Reynaud. That's our panel this evening. I am the moderator. My name is Una McCormack. I'm a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of science fiction. I specialize in TV tie-in fiction. I particularly write in the Star Trek and Doctor Who universe. I used to be an academic. I'm recovering now, much better. But I still have an interest in feminist science fiction. And I've recently joined the editorial board of Gold SF, which is a new imprint from Goldsmiths Press, looking to publish new voices in intersectional feminist science fiction. So we have a range of backgrounds. We're novelists, short story writers, filmmakers. Martin's films draw extensively on oral landscapes and music. Plenty of sort of expertise, diverse expertise. But we're joined sort of united by this interest in science fiction, what this genre can do, how it can shape our future and assist us in reinventing future interactions together. So I think I'd like to open our discussion by exploring first the appeal of science fiction to us and why as creators we've been drawn to it and what's kept us with it. Why did we never put aside childish things? What was the attraction and what kept us going? For me, very simply, I was 6 when Star Wars came out. I sat in the cinema and a big spaceship went past, and that was enough for a 6-year-old. A little later, it was Dystopias and Ursula Le Guin. But I'd love to know what it was that beguiled us and then that kept us working in this genre. So Sylvie, would you like to sort of explore that?
Well, 1977 was important for me too, because I was 14 when Star Wars came out. And I was already watching a TV series called Space 1999. Some of you may know what it was. So when I watched it and I asked friends, are there any books just like this? Because I didn't know of any books, and there were. And so I started to read books, and then Star Wars came out, and it blew my mind, of course. And I went on to discover lots and lots of different authors and text and all that, and I never stopped.
So a visual stimulus again, a sort of, I mean, I remember Space 1999. It was pretty good for the 70s, but Star Wars seems to hit at a moment, I think. Ken, what was it that beguiled you first about science fiction?
I think what beguiled me was a book which I read probably before 1970, when I was in high school, just in secondary school, not far from where I'm sitting now, actually. And the book was called Rocket to Limbo by Alan E. Nurse, an American writer who wrote quite a lot of novels for younger readers, young being teenage readers, I guess. And I was introduced in that novel to all the golden age tropes, like generation starships, faster than light starships, telepathy, lost colonies, all that kind of thing. And the image of a spaceport with people from different planets and around different stars, I think they were all human descended. It wasn't a story with aliens in it. Just trooping up and down the ramps of the starships and going off to exotic locations. This, I think, was what beguiled me. And from there, I discovered essentially Golden Age SF as done for younger readers in the first instance. People like Nurse himself, Heinlein, and then I moved on to the grown-up library and ransacked all the books that were in that line. So, in my teens, I was completely besotted with science fiction. And I later on, when I was at university, discovered the new wave of SF, which was a more critical look at that, or a more critical take on the tropes and so on. And it was around that time that I met Ian Banks, and late on in secondary school, and we immediately found we had the same interests. But what drew me back into science fiction after feeling a bit too, getting a bit jaded with it in my, I guess, early 20s, was when, much later in the 80s, I encountered cyberpunk, I encountered Neuromancer. And this, for the first time, was science fiction that seemed to be about the kind of world that was growing around me. And it really revived my interest in it.
So it was a promise of a new future at first, and then something that was clearly diagnosing and speaking to you of the kind of times that you were living in, I guess. Neuromancer was pretty stunning at the time, I think. Martin, what was it that I know that Back to the Future was very significant in your imaginary. What else beguiled you? What sort of drew you in?
Well, even though I the first Star Wars came out before I was born, but I was the perfect generation to welcome its sequel. My brothers.
Cut him off now.
No, but I'm a huge Star Wars fan. Don't get me wrong. Like I was old enough to go see Empire Strikes Back with my older brothers and Return of the Jedi, and I'm a huge fan of Spielberg, Kubrick. Those movies were inhabiting our house as a child. I remember seeing a lot of sci-fi movies. So of course it opens up a lot of doors, but I would say that my first true entrance to sci-fi came from Franco-Belge comic books, like the real science fiction for me was with Moebius, and Kibilal and Mézières and Druyet and Jodorowsky and all those great, the Métal Hurlant magazine to me was a huge influence. And I remember, of course, it opens doors to the world of possibilities and how to travel through your mind. And this to me, of course, as a kid was truly appealing, and also how much of science fiction speaks of who we are today. I think that's where the need for science fiction resides, is because it speaks so much of who we are, how we think today, and by transposing ourselves in the future. And what I find fascinating about it, even when you look at the the first movies by Méliès and that sort of fantasy elements, sometimes like we, of course, what we predict is wrong. But what is fascinating is some of the time what we predict is true, and artists sometimes are better in predicting the future than futurologists and scientists. And this I find fascinating, the fact that we can shape our own future, and sometimes that what we shape in our imagination actually comes true and even influence reality. Like I remember when I saw the first Blade Runner, here's a film that truly looked like what the future could really be. It was the first time that somebody really took care of building a world that, and of course 2001 A Space Odyssey is major in that way, but you know what I mean, like a true vision of what the future could be.
I think those I think visual representations of what the future might look like are almost more successful than what we might see in terms of prediction of technology and so forth. It's hard to see where the images from Metropolis leave off, and the world that we live in now begins in many ways. You can sort of see a straight line from Fritz Lang to Blade Runner to just any sort of visual landscape. A kind of a picture of a cityscape that you might see now, that seems to have lodged itself very, very deeply in our collective imaginary, I think. So we had moments of impact, and yet science fiction, for some reason, we didn't leave it aside. We decided it wasn't juvenile, that there was still scope in that for us to tell more mature stories or reflect on the world around us. We're talking about a genre now that has about it's Anglophone science fiction. We could argue back to Frankenstein, and I would, but certainly a century of tropes, of toolkits, of apparatus. Is there a danger of nostalgia when we work in this genre? Do you think we run a risk of coming back to similar ideas and wanting to rework them? Faster than light, generation ships. Is there life to be breathed into science fiction? Ken?
Well, I'm trying at the moment. I'm currently working on a space opera involving faster than light travel in the not terribly distant future, say 50 years from now. Yeah. And it's just been, I found it fun. In fact, part of the reason I started writing this was to try and recapture something of what I felt reading the first science fiction novel I'd ever read as science fiction, and see if there is still a way of having that feeling of romance and possibility of you step onto something and it takes you somewhere else. And so it's quite a strong metaphor, I think, for what happens every time we get on a train, on a plane, on a ship. But the world, well, do you remember getting on planes and trains and ships? I'm beginning to wonder if that was all some dream I had.
Yeah. It's incredible, actually. It's a year now almost since I've been a mile into Cambridge city centre. Yeah. And I was in Los Angeles in February. And then I haven't been any further. So they are fantastical. They've become voyages of the imagination, haven't they? A bus. I might catch a bus again. It's crazy. Sorry, Ken, you were saying you're breathing life into this. Yeah.
Well, I hope so. But what I wanted to say is that I really do recognize that danger that you pointed out, Una, because, cyberpunk, which was incredibly new and fresh when it arrived, and you can still read the stories of Sterling and Pat Cadigan and William Gibson and so on with tremendous interest and enthusiasm. But now they are already a generation ago, more than a generation, and many technological generations ago. So I think just as, there was in the Anglophone SF, there was the Gernsback era, there was the Campbell era, there was the new wave, which was the cultural upheavals of the 1960s, sort of making their way into science fiction and making themselves felt. And then in the 80s, there was cyberpunk as computers began to come in to become more or less ubiquitous, first in the office and then in everyday life. And now we're already living in the world that was, it's a mundane, we're living in a mundane version of the cyberpunk world, let's say, and almost a banal version of the cyberpunk world. And I still although there are tremendous diversity emerging in science fiction from post-colonial countries, science fiction from, feminist science, much more feminist science fiction and other gender explorations in science fiction. There's race and class and so on coming into science fiction much more clearly than before. But in terms of literary movement, I think there's some pressure building up, I think, and there will at some point, I hope, be a new literary movement, if you like, kickstarting science fiction in new directions.
I think the most electric sort of science fiction encounter I've had over the last year was listening to a Radio 3 program about Afrofuturist music. And suddenly I had this sense of futures I had not encountered being narrated, not through word, but through sound. So, Sylvie, is there anything you'd want to pick up on there about how do we keep this genre fresh? How do we keep breathing energy into it?
The way I see it is that the genre keeps itself fresh by reusing the good old tropes, but putting them in a new context, in the context of climate change and computers and cyberspace and the internet and all the contemporary questions that we are living through. So the best science fiction does that, in my opinion, taking the old stuff or so-called old stuff and reusing it again, but in a way which is relevant to our times.
The Frankenstein story remains contemporary. We can come back to that again and again, I think. Yeah. Martin, something I wanted to ask you specifically about your project. I know Mars and Avril, you lived with for really quite a long time. It was it was a late teenage idea. It was graphic novels. It became a film. Did you find your encounter with the stories change? The kind of science fictional story that you wanted to tell, did that change over the process of that project evolving and emerging?
Well, what was interesting about this project, at least when we were doing it, is that we were trying to look at the past and project it in the future. What we called retrofuturism. And I was lucky enough to work with a childhood hero of mine, François Scaton, who is another huge comic book or graphic novel artist in Belgium, with the series The Obscure Cities, where he sort of draws cities in a parallel universe. So we had the incredible chance of working together to give a shape to Montreal in the future. And the way we approach it is to add layers on top of the pre-existing reality, because the future is only us looking at the past and using what's already there to build on top of it. And now we've sort of come to a point, and this is the only thing that I would add on top of my two colleagues, is that, like in Back to the Future 2, the future was 2015. And in Blade Runner, the first one, the future was 2019. We've passed beyond what the cinema of the 80s was dreaming as being the future. And in some ways, it's incredibly disappointing. And the future around us is a bit drab, it's a bit boring. And I think we have a role as storytellers to give people an ability to dream and still keep that dream alive and dream of new things and what based on the current future or present, whatever we live in. I think we have a role to play in giving the future a shape that gives us and our children also a sense of wanting to belong and to thrive and to continue to evolve as a species. I don't see it only just as a entertaining storytelling. I like to think of science fiction as having something more to say, you know.
Yeah, that it in the act of telling or imagining these stories, we start the possibility of those worlds coming into being. I suppose it's a sort of first laying of the stone of the pathway to those words. Yeah,
because a book or a film cannot change the world per se, but it can plant a seed for something, you know, like that's how big changes begin, you know, like it's hard to measure sometimes the influence that past artists or authors had on us, but I'm sure it's you know, it's tremendous, and we still feel the echoes of that, and sometimes it's subconsciously, but it's there.
I'm going to pick up on some of this in a minute. I've got some questions related to that. We've just got a question here in chat that I'm going to pick up because I think it reflects on some of them. Do dystopian books? So it's a question from a listener. Do dystopian books scare us into wanting to avoid those futures? Do utopian futures inspire us with something to work towards? And does the panel have a preference, or think one is better than the other, or that they're complementary? So utopian and dystopian fiction. Sylvie, any thoughts on that?
Complementary. I like to have both. I find it a bit difficult to read truly dystopian work at the moment, strangely enough. Because, well, I'm already a bit on the pessimistic side myself, usually. So I need to go and look for things which are not on this on that particular side. But I guess I'm just like everybody. At the moment, the situation is as it is. So it's
absolutely
getting difficult to the reality is getting very, very dystopian at the moment.
It is very much so. Ken, utopia, dystopia.
It's quite hard to answer the question exactly as it's framed, because dystopias are clearly meant to scare us. And I think possibly the most successful dystopia of all time must be 1984 by George Orwell, because the writing of that book contributed to preventing its coming about, or at least it created a shorthand for expressing opposition to that kind of society, however you define it. And Brave New World, similarly, Fahrenheit 451, I think all the dystopias have given us the classic dystopias, if you like, have given us a certain language with which to describe things that we don't like, don't approve of, fear, want to resist, whether it's surveillance or socialism or genetic manipulation or mind control. All of these features of dystopia, we have a ready-made vocabulary to and imaginative, and the imaginative tools to articulate our opposition to them. But it's much harder to find ways. There have been no equally or even remotely similarly successful utopias in terms of mass appeal. I've sometimes said that my late friend Ian Banks wrote the only utopia in the entire history of Western civilization where almost everyone who reads it would actually like to live, in the culture novels. Because I don't fancy living in Plato's Republic or More's Utopia with its slave camps and mercenaries, or even in Le Guin's Anaris with its endless moral pressure. So but Banks's culture is so exuberant and therefore, in a way, perhaps because it's unrealistic, that it is a dream kingdom that we can all engage with.
I don't think I would even want to live on the, this is my bread and butter. I think even the Enterprise, I would, I'd start sabotaging it, to be honest. There's a kind of cultural coercion involved in there. I'd quickly get myself demobbed or kicked out or so forth. Martin, a preference for utopia or dystopia or?
For sure, I dive into utopian stuff because it makes me dream. You know, like I've always been fascinated. I'm a formalist. You know, I'm fascinated by architecture and futuristic architecture, and that's why I love François Cayetan's world so much. And one filmmaker that achieved both. You know, and it's a very special movie probably for that reason. He mixed both utopian and dystopian. Was Terry Gilliam with Brazil, you know, which is a fantastic film that sort of bridged the gap in between those two things in a brilliant manner. But I do think there's a necessity in utopia. I talked about that earlier, and dystopia is more like Ken was pointing out, you know, like also probably a necessity to expose human fears and contrast. But there's a place for both. It depends. What story you are trying to shape, obviously, and today we live in a contrasted world where there's a lot of gray zones, and the more we advance, the more complex it becomes, you know. And these things are hard to grasp. Like the science fiction of the future is going to be extremely complex, I think.
Yeah, I've become very enamored with the kind of the later utopias of Le Guin, and Ares is very harsh. But her more pastoral utopias, her slow-moving, peaceful, partially connected technologically, but much more connected to the immediate natural world, have a kind of briefness and immediacy that I find a lot more appealing. And I think they give habits of thought. So we're all locked in these small places at the moment, so they give maybe habits of thought and meditation that allow you to cope with the moment. Whether they allow you to politicize into something greater, I'm not entirely sure of that mechanism yet. That's a problem. I want to pick up on something that I think we've touched on, which maybe connects to this, which is about how dystopias or science fiction warn or train us into habits of thought. And it was my observation at the start of the pandemic that those of my friends who were science fiction readers were amongst those who I thought more rapidly understood how long this pandemic was going to last. And I think were more rapidly able to move from bargaining and denial into, if not acceptance, then at least a kind of grief and mode of being able to endure. So I think a lot of people caught up or have caught up over a year. I think possibly in some places the people in power are still in bargaining and denial. So I'm thinking of how science fiction can give us habits of thought, but how we can turn those into kind of concrete pathways to reinvention, to progress. Another thing that came to mind is that Stacey Abrams, who was in part responsible, a group around her, obviously many activists around her, partly responsible for delivering those electoral successes in Georgia. A great play was made of what a great Star Trek fan she was, and how this had kind of influenced her and inspired her and so forth. So I guess my question is, are we flattering ourselves to think that science fiction can steer change? And how do we go about getting the right stories, by which I mean, our stories? How do we get them to have traction? How do we turn them into something concrete that can cause change? Martin, any thoughts on that?
I think if it addresses human concerns that are of importance and of matter in today's society. Of course, you think of climate change. Sylvie mentioned it, but I've been trying for years to make an animated feature science fiction movie that deals with that subject, and there's no interest at all from buyers. And I've toured all the film markets. I've tried for years. We have an incredible script, and the reaction I get is, everybody wants to do it, but it doesn't interest people that much. And I'm like, wow, this is like incredible to hear, because I think it addresses fears, and the current pandemic addresses fears, such a small enemy, almost invisible, that paralyzes the whole planet is kind of a science fiction reality that we live in, and we yet have to understand how those mechanisms work. But I think there's an incredible opportunity right now to question ourselves. I have a 12-year-old son, so I have a lot of discussions because he's a perfect target audience for those questions and what's new and what's coming. And I love speaking with my son about those questions. And I think there's a underlying subtext to the current pandemic that we should address more in science fiction or literature or in what the current debate is our profound fear of being sick, of aging, of not making it, of not being there long enough, of not making a change. Like all those things are being underlined by the pandemic in such a disturbing way for many people. So I think for us storytellers, like there is an opportunity there to address that and try to build on that, and not in a pessimistic way, because I think science fiction should give hope. There's too much darkness already.
It's hard if the people who are running this simulation could have rolled a set of dice that would more obviously highlight the kind of failings of contemporary society in terms of inequality, to lay it bare. They couldn't have rolled dice better than a pandemic. I think it's thrown everything into really stark relief. Sylvie, this question of how the pressing themes that science fiction can address itself to right now, how do we get them to what they might be, how we get them to have traction? We talked about climate change.
Well, what I think is that science fiction makes people ready to appreciate that there are different outcomes at all times, and to juggle between these potentialities, things that might happen, and that's what's really important about science fiction, in my opinion. Gaining traction, that's a completely different set of mind, because you have to think about politics and I mean, I can't see how I can answer that.
Yeah, that's the one we want to bottle, really, isn't it?
It's I'm quite surprised by what Martin is saying, because well, on the one hand, it's understandable that people don't want to know about climate change because it is frightening. But on the other hand, we should be able to think about it, because if we don't think about it, nothing's going to happen. You have to take hold of issues if you want to have any kind of reaction which is something other than fright, because fright isn't a very good, fear is not a very good thing to act upon. It makes you do very stupid things most of the time.
No, exactly. Fear is something that we need to deal with, but it's a barrier to many things.
Working with, I teach creative writing, and I've had a student writing a SciFi, sort of science fiction climate change story. And when she was doing her critical work, she would come back again and again to this problem that there was a sort of mismatch between what we know is happening and what we feel we can do to act, and that the problem feels so big that a paralysis sets in and people just box that over. And her hope is that as more SciFi stories sort of percolate through into our narrative, people maybe become more able to cope, more able to address it, have the language by which to talk about how we deal with and answer to this. We've got quite a nice question that's just popped up, which I think is going to take on some of this. Ken, you might have something with this. Do you think that as science fiction taking gender and equity issues, climate change, environmental and social crisis into account, could imagine and teach us a future without a race for technological progress? What do we make of this one?
I think I'll pass that to someone better qualified to answer it, honestly.
Martin, any thoughts? It's a big one. Could it help us imagine and teach us a future without a race for technological progress?
There are two different things, because the race is something from society, and technology is technology is also so mixed up with societies. So that's a lot of things. Competition. Well, I find that competition is really difficult not to have in any society. That there is good competition and bad competition. So that's complicated.
It's a big question. As I read it out, I thought, crumbs, I'm glad I'm the moderator here. Martin, have you any response to that?
Well, the only thing I could say is I've been reflecting a lot on this question, because I'm writing a script with James V. Hart, who's a great sci-fi writer, and we've been working on that script for 2 years now. It's called Water Nova, and it deals with a point in time where technology has reached a point where we cannot go beyond, because we've sort of found ways to understand cracked nature's code, and how nature, being the ultimate form of technology, works. And that is but at this point in time, the earth becomes inhabitable. So it's time for us to leave Earth. So I think me, I like to address these questions and start dreaming about them, and try to find not answers but possibilities in stories. And that's what I find the most interesting. So this question to me is more like a premise to start writing. It's actually a great question, but it would take 2 hours to dive into it properly.
It really, really would, wouldn't it? Yeah, my mind went to teaching story to creative writers, and I think a lot of what standard creative writing textbooks would tell you is it's got to have conflict. It's got to have conflict. It's got to have conflict. And you go, well, sit back and think about that. And my touchstone is always Le Guin, and she has this wonderful idea that conflict and story you can't conflate these. That there are stories. Story isn't conflict; it's change, and that we need to move from a sense that conflict is a driver to telling stories of belonging and changing and shifting and knowing and understanding and creating, and these might might give us a greater wealth of being able to inhabit and respond to the world. So I think you're right. That's almost a question for a panel in itself. We have another question here. If you were the author of the science fiction script that is telling our story with the pandemic today, how would you imagine evolution of the story at this point, especially in relation to human connections? So we're writing, I guess we're writing we see this a lot. I see this a lot on Twitter, actually, that people talk about 2020 or the past couple of years in 2020 in terms of it being like an HBO series. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, I thought it was... that season finale was terrible, but I loved that Biden election. That was a great 2021 premiere sort of thing. So if we were sitting down and breaking story for season 4, 2021, how would we imagine the evolution of this story at this point, especially in relation to human connections?
I think, sadly, evolution is the appropriate word here, because I think the two things that, as you said earlier, the people who are in power in society are not science fiction readers. Many of them aren't even scientists. And the two things, very simple things, rather deeply related things, actually, that they don't intuitively grasp the way people who read a lot of science fiction perhaps do, however dimly. And one is the power of exponential multiplication. That something is doubling every month, or every week. You need to worry about it when there's 2 of them, not when there's 1 million of them. And because you get to 1 million very, very fast. the other one is evolution. And last week I was chatting with some, on Zoom, of course, with some friends in the science fiction community, and somebody made a very similar point that at this point in the story, the bit that would be the teaser little bit would be mutant strains circulating in Brazil. That the idea that the fact is, and Britain is one of them actually, there are these large pools of viruses that are moving about and getting ever more opportunity to do so and to mutate, is, I think, the most terrifying thing. So I think that would be the slowly increasing underlying worry for the characters at that point. And you'd have done the foreshadowing, and you'd have, about a month from now, you'd have an explosive reveal where things take a sharp turn for the worse. That's how I'd plot it. I hope it doesn't turn out like that.
Martin, can you salvage a more optimistic progress for this narrative?
Well, all I can say is that a crisis is always an accelerator for change. Now, the current crisis we are in is going to force changes that would happen, in the natural course of time, but it's going to make them happen faster. It's going to change the way business works. It's going to change the way individual works. We already see it. People are adapting. What I find interesting is humans' incredible, faculty for adapting itself, because we have no choice, and we must still continue to function as individuals and as society. What I come back to the notion of fear again, because Sylvie said I'm surprised. I do think that living in fear is not an option. We should never, as a society, take that path and decide that we are going to live with fear, because it might not be the first pandemic. In the future we may see worse. Maybe this one is a repetition for a bigger one. So I think that we should change instead of our mindset and how we approach this, because it's part of also how to cope with fear and address what's at the core root of it, and hopefully manage our way through it in a more in an optimistic way, and as a society find codes, and I think ultimately it's always about the direction we're following. Unfortunately, right now we have strong people in power that don't convey the right message, and that is also part of our reality. We can maybe it's part of your next questions, but I find this to be contributing a lot to the fear factor and to what we see, how we see the crisis evolving.
When I think back to sort of March and the first lockdown in Britain, and there was we've burned out to some extent, or we've accommodated, but there was a sort of mobilization, kind of groundswell, grassroots mobilization of goodwill, and kind of reaching out to each other. There were, I was attending or seeing in front of me many small events like this that people were just organizing, a kind of reaching out and a connectivity. I think people burnt out quite quickly, and summer people went out a lot more. We're seeing a little bit more of this again, I think, as people kind of bedding down for second and third lockdowns across a winter. But there was a sort of something bubbled up that, people grabbed Zoom, or they said, I know how this works. I know how we can connect. I know how we can find meaningful interaction. And then we found that colleagues who were disabled or had not been able to attend online, attend face-to-face events, were saying, well, this is making these are accommodations that would make a marked difference to our life. And I think it's opened windows on different forms of living, how people have been living their lives, that I'm not going to forget, actually. I'm going to sort of look around and go, that changed how I understood how people were living in the world. just because I was not able to do all the things that I had been able to do. It connected me in different ways and into different worlds. We've got another good question here. Changing the future is a big responsibility. Is escapism enough? Well, I don't think science fiction is necessarily escapism. It can be. It can be comforting, and many types of literature and art can be comforting. Any thoughts on that, Sylvie?
The book I'm writing at the moment is about, it's taking place about 50 years in the future, 50, 70 years. And there's this enormous fleet of alien spaceships coming and then going away from Earth. And there are interactions. There is a base on the asteroid Ceres, and there are two kids who realize that they will never be able to go on the spaceships. That the fleet is going to go away, and they don't want that. And so they manage to get on board a mission shuttle. And in fact, for me, it sums up the thing about escapism, which is, okay, there's this climate change, and in some parts of the earth, the situation is really terrible and all that. But there are still stars out there, and there are aliens and all sorts of interesting things, and you can't let go of that either, because it's letting go of something which is very important for human beings, which is understanding the world and discovering it. So it's not just escapism, I think. It's something more. It's something deeper in human nature that wants those things out there.
Yeah. Ken?
I don't know if it was Tolkien or C.S. Lewis who said, which profession is most likely to be concerned about the possibility of escape? The answer being jailers.
Yeah.
That the mere escape from our current reality, whether it's a fantasy like Lord of the Rings, or science fiction, even as like War of the Worlds, okay, or Star Trek or Star Wars, I think that they lift our spirits and open our horizons in ways that have indirect effects. Just up the Clyde from where I am, there are several companies actually building small spacecraft that have gone into orbit. And one of the founders and CEO of one of these companies told me he had been inspired to go into the space business by reading the culture novels, which are completely unrealistic physically. And, in terms of our known physics, they have a consistent physics of their own. And I think there are many, many instances of people who've been drawn into particular fields and to making worthwhile contributions because they've been inspired by science fiction. So in that sense, I don't think escapism isn't necessarily a bad thing. I have to say, in terms of responsibility, it's always been a relief to me whenever I receive an email from someone who says, I'm a big fan of your early novels, and as a result, I've gone into study, and usually it's studying either political philosophy or computer science. And I always go, thank goodness they haven't gone into guerrilla warfare. Or worse, the Labour Party. The only novel of mine that has, as far as I know, has had any real world political traction in the sense of being referred to by actual politicians was a somewhat dystopian novel called Intrusion. And I'm quite, that's one little piece of satisfaction in terms of real world effect. But most of the time, you're just relieved that you don't influence people to do crazy things.
I think somebody once told me that they'd read a book of mine and it persuaded them they needed therapy. So that's the. I don't know. In British academia, I think we would call this impact. It's a kind of metric that we have to see whether our work has had any influence on the world or not. I don't know whether that would count as impact, but I did drive someone to therapy, so I don't know. I think it is Tolkien who talks about jailers in Escape, isn't it? I think after he's accused of writing escapism, he makes that extremely cogent point. Martin, any thoughts on our responsibility as science fiction writers, or are we just offering escape or something more concrete?
No, but if we only for escape, I really think it's big. You know, what would be a world without literature and films and music? And like it would be horrible. You know, like what distinguishes us as a human species is this ability to make our dreams become realities. And what I don't see escapism as being a place where you block yourself from reality outside. It's not about being blind to what the real world is. It's about getting, when you as Una as an author creates a book, or it's like you're the master of your own dimension and you invite other people to dream in it. Or when you do a movie, and that ability it's a responsibility, and it's huge. And when that somebody comes in and dreams with you, as long as they can draw things that they can bring in their reality with them, I think that is huge. I see this as a huge contribution. I don't think in that sense that escapism is bad. On the contrary.
There's a very beautiful moment in Russell Hoban's Ridley Walker, which takes place in a completely destroyed, a sort of post-apocalyptic Kent, and the protagonist finds himself in the ruins of Canterbury Cathedral, finds himself in the crypt, and has a vision of not just of what the cathedral must have been like, but these kind of fragments that he understands from the lost high technical civilization, and he sort of mourns what we've been and what we've come to. But that moment of sort of grief is at the same time a sort of vision of what's possible. That humanity did come this far, did do these marvelous things, and I might be grubbing in the dirt in the ruins of an old church, but these things are buildable. It's simultaneously a kind of moment of grief and the birth of hope, I think. We've got one last question here, and then we're starting to run out of time, but you might enjoy this question. Is Zoom our future together?
Oh dear. I hope not. One thing that we're all saturated of, I think, is Zoom meetings and Zoom call. I spend like half of my days on Zoom. There's something that will never replace a real meeting with real coffee, with real people.
I smelt that coffee then when you you said it. A wonderful flash to sort of sitting in a very sort of civilized cafe somewhere. Sylvie, sorry, Martin, carry on.
No. But the one thing that's going to be positive when we all get out of this pandemic is man, connecting with somebody, and then go to work and be with people and go to bars and restaurants. Like it's I think we're all going to appreciate it even more. So maybe maybe we needed that in the end, to bring us back together in a better way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very different for me because I'm usually a translator, and I work from home, and I am perfectly happy staying on my own and working on my own, and I don't get a lot of Zoom meetings since the pandemic. So I'm not fed up with it yet. It's okay. It's still okay. But of course, it's impossible to spend your own life seeing people on a screen. I mean, nobody can live like that for years and years. It's okay when it comes as a break in your day, but I don't know how it would be like for me if I had to work through Zoom a lot, because it's not the case. It's just me and the screen most of the time, and some Zoom from time to time. But I imagine people who have to work like this all the time find it very, very different.
Exhausting. Ken, is it our future?
Well, like Martin said, I hope not. I totally agree with what Sylvie said, and all my dreams, whether they're good or bad, are all in a pre-pandemic world where nobody has masks and we're all fighting or hugging each other or doing normal things. And I think a lot of people are, notice this in their dreams. In their dreams, we don't have the pandemic, and that's my utopia at the moment. But I think there's a very positive side, a tremendously positive side to electronic connectivity. I mean, we're talking across 3-4 countries and across an ocean, and it's quite seamless. And I've noticed since I first really became aware of the internet and using it in the mid-1990s, which is before quite a lot of the people listening to this were born, but that being able to connect with people quite directly across the Atlantic, for example, and sometimes across cultures, and has changed my consciousness in some subtle way. And I'm sure that quite a lot, even of the social media that people we see as problematic, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or TikTok or whatever, they are changing us. And I think some of the ways they're changing us is positive, because there are any number of people in our field in science fiction that I'd never have got to know without electronic communication and one-to-many and many-to-many communications of one kind or another.
Yeah, I know that I've just a meeting like this probably would not have happened a year ago. One thing that did bear down quite heavily on me was thinking that I have a little girl who's just turned 7, and probably by the time things normalize, she'll be 8, and that will be a quarter of her life will have been sort of spent in this weird pandemic world. But hopefully not much more of it. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. I think there's loads more we could have talked. I know I sent you many more questions that we could have discussed. Where can people find you online if they want to follow your work or find out more about your work? Where should they be looking? Sylvie?
There's my Facebook author page and the blog, which hasn't been updated for quite a while. And well, that's it. I don't have a site.
Yeah, but they can find you online.
Oh yes, there's a Twitter too. I forgot the Twitter.
Jardin Visuel, is that right? I think. Yeah, Jardin Visuel. I think you are on Twitter. Is that right? I think so.
Sorry?
Your Twitter name is Jardin Visuel. Is that right?
I don't think so.
Okay, apologies. I've got the wrong one in that case. Ken, you can.
Jardin Virtuel, yes.
Virtuel, beg your pardon. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I've got it now.
Ken, I know you're. I was trying to understand an English thing, and it wasn't in English.
I was my abominable French accent. Sorry about that. Ken, where can you be found?
On Twitter, I'm at Amendlock, as in the anagram of my name, Ken MacLeod, and as in a philosophical slogan, Amend Lock, L-O-C-K-E. So all one word. And for my also seldom updated blog, kenmacleod.blogspot.com.
Martin, where can you be found?
Everywhere. I'm on Vimeo. I have my Vimeo channel. You can find me. You can start by watching my TED Talk. And if you go through it for 11 minutes, then you can look deeper. I'm on IMDb. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm everywhere.
Good. All right. And I can be found swearing on Twitter at Una McCormack. So I think that brings us to 9 o'clock. I'm really grateful. Thank you very much for coming and doing another Zoom talk, or exceptionally doing a Zoom talk in your case, Sylvie. I really appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think we could easily have gone on for another half hour, but thank you all very, very much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank the French Institute.
There's one last thing.
Bonsoir.
Yes,
Bonsoir.
the Zoom call was a sci-fi idea many years ago, like that we all dream would happen one day. So it's one of the things that we owe to science fiction.
That we're able to do this.
Definitely, yes.
Bye bye.
Thank you, everybody.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much, everybody, and good night.
Thank you.